Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today I'd like to continue on with a video a day during this month of October 2020, wherein it is my great honor to be able to talk about films or TV shows that for one reason or another, in my view, have or can be said to have a connection in spirit to the season that we find ourselves in right now. 'Tis the Halloween season indeed. And today I'd like to focus on what might be termed to be a sci-fi film. It is a monster movie. And to be specific, it is a tokusatsu or kaiju film from Japan. And the film was released in 1984 in Japan. This is the really interesting film, which is called in Japanese GOJIRA. It is sometimes also referred to as the Return of Godzilla and some other titles, and I'll get to an example of that later in this video. This is a film from 1984, and the Japanese version is approximately 103 minutes, directed by Koji Hashimoto and produced by Tomoyuki Tanaka, and also special effects Teruyoshi Nakano. This marks the return, if you will, to the big screen of the great cinematic icon of Japanese cinema, that is Gojira or Godzilla. As you may know, the run of Godzilla films or Gojira films commenced in 1954 with the release of the original black and white classic film, and that run continued on through the 50s and 60s and into the mid-70s with a series of Gojira films that are now often referred to in a group as the so-called Showa era films of the Godzilla series, leading up to Terror of Mechagodzilla in 1975. After that, though, there were no cinematic adventures of Gojira to be had until we come to the color extravaganza that is this film, Gojira, in 1984. The appearance and the approach and style of the filmmakers with regard to the big one here, I think, is really interesting. I think we note from the outset that this is a story that is fully rooted in the tradition of Gojira, the idea of this large monster attacking Japan. And what is more, it is a kind of a continuation in spirit, anyway, to the original Gojira film from 1954 in many interesting ways. So first, it is a film that, in the universe of the film itself, the story, it takes the threat of Gojira, the monster, very seriously, such that the attack by the monster on the mainland becomes almost an existential threat to the existence of Japan as a whole. So the characters in the film take the threat very seriously. And so this reminds us, of course, of the initial film from the 50s. This also creates the sense, therefore, of Gojira as maybe an antagonist and a force to be reckoned with, rather than a kind of ally or good guy, as we would see in the Showa era, the latter half of the Showa era in particular. And so Godzilla here is, like his origins, he is firmly rooted in the role of the antagonist. And also what is interesting is that the 1954 film in particular really made, I think, a very effective a cinematic establishment, if you will, of Godzilla as a kind of metaphor for nuclear power and the atomic age. And I think that this film, the 1984 extravaganza that is Godzilla, this also, in a very interesting way, tries to establish ties, thematic ones, between the monster and the situation and certain Cold War tensions that I think can be very reflective and emblematic of the early 80s. And so I really admire that about this film, how in many ways, including this attempt to establish a metaphorical tie with nuclear arms and the Cold War. I think that this therefore makes this 1984 film in many ways a sort of spiritual sequel, if you will, to the 1954 original film. And so in that way, I think it is a firm reestablishment of the classic mode of Godzilla, for lack of a better phrase. That's not to say, of course, that this film isn't campy and it's not without its funny moments. I think on the contrary, there are a lot of campy moments to this film. And it is a kaiju film, and so you go along with it or you don't. And kaiju films, I know, aren't for everyone. And I think people, very reasonably so, will react to kaiju films depending on their perspective or their point of view. Some people, I think, will go along with this because maybe they are really big fans of kaiju. Other people might not necessarily look at this as seriously as, say, the world and characters within the film itself. And yet others might see a level of campiness and entertainment that makes it fun and makes it an engaging hour and a half at the movies or so. And anywhere in between or among those poles. And so wherever you fall, my friends, I think in any event, what we are getting here is the potential for a grand entertainment. And if you look at this film and you see a kind of interesting throwback to the original film, I think that's great. If you look at this film and you see campy moments, I think that's also great. And if you laugh and have a good time with it, I think that's also really great. And if you look at this film also as being, in many ways too, an update, a modernization, if you will, of the cinematic incarnation of Godzilla, I think that's also great too. And we should pay attention to this because we are getting really sophisticated model work, at least compared to the rest of the films, of the Godzilla films that came, as I say, up to the 1970s. We are getting a lot of sophisticated model work. We are getting some really great suit design. The design of Godzilla, the monster, is a little bit different, or quite different from what we might have seen in the early Showa era period. And so there is a bit of a redesign of the monster layout. And the suit also is a very interesting one, so it calls into attention the suit acting that's going into the proceedings here. And also some of the puppetry, puppet animatronic movements and of the facial gestures of the monster itself, I think is really quite sophisticated. And this is I think a wonderful example of the kind of scale up, if you will, of miniature work and special effects and suit acting, etc., that will in fact usher in a period of films after this film from the mid-'80s. So after this, we'll have to wait another few years until the next Godzilla film. But once we do, that'll then fully establish and usher in a new period of Godzilla films, which is known colloquially as the Heisei era of Godzilla films. And so I think in a lot of ways, this film really helped to establish a lot of the approach and style and format, if you will, of Godzilla for this new age. And so in that respect, I think this film is very significant in the Godzilla history of the cinematic course, if you will, of this icon of a character. And finally, I should say, as a kind of closing, before I go on to some other comments about other versions, I should say that this is one of my favorite films in the Godzilla franchise. I really like its blend of seriousness, and also when it goes for the funny and campy, I think it really goes for it. And there are some moments too that I think make it very charming and make it very quaint, but also I think there is a level of seriousness, and people both in front and behind the camera are obviously taking the subject matter very seriously. And so I admire that and respect that very much about this film. And I like what it establishes, and I like what it also tries to do in terms of connecting with the past. And also I like the fact that it is making the way for the future of Godzilla into the 80s and into the 90s and beyond. So this is the film from 1984, Gojira. I should mention that this is the Japanese Blu-ray that I have. This is the 103-minute version or so, so the Japanese version. And in case you're interested, I also have this on the Kraken releasing Blu-ray, which is right here. This is also the Japanese version, the 103-minute version. And this has the Japanese language track and and an English language track for the 103-minute version. So it's an interesting English language track if you haven't heard it. But if you are looking for the Japanese version, the long version, so to speak, then you can find it on this Blu-ray if you can track this down. Incidentally, just note that the Japanese Blu-ray that I have does not have any English track, nor does it have any English subtitles, so please bear that in mind in case you are interested. I also do have this on a DVD, but it's in a shelf over there. I should also mention that, as I say, this was from 1984, and then in 1985, there was this, which was another English language version of the film, as some of you may know, but it was an edited down version, and actually it was edited from the original film, and so we have certain plot elements actually that due to the editing are somewhat changed, either in a minor way or in some instances in fact in quite a significant way. And so what we're getting here is an edited version. This is 91 minutes or so, but what this does have that the Japanese version does not have is that it has scenes that were shot for this particular version that include the character played by Raymond Burr. And for those of you who recall, the original Japanese or the original Godzilla film from the 1950s also had the edited English language version of that film, which was of course the King of the Monsters version, and that had some of the footage in there of the character of Steve Martin, played by Raymond Burr, in that film. And so we have, therefore, another interesting connection between the original film and now the 1980s film, in that both have their own distinct versions in English, with Raymond Burr appearing as the same character. And so that also provides, in an interesting way too, a spiritual sense of a continuity or a sequel-like relationship between the two films. Incidentally, I should also point out that apart from what it adds and what it takes away or edits out, it also has some very interesting ways in which the dialogue is recorded and applied to the scenes. Some might call this a bit of a campy approach to the material, and so And I think that's a very reasonable approach to have as well. Of course, there's the appearance of Raymond Burr and that particular situation, and what he brings to the table, and also Dr. Pepper, a lot of Dr. Pepper, in fact. And so that is Godzilla 1985. And I remember also that I actually saw Godzilla 1985 in the theater when I was in the US, and I was very young, so I don't remember the specifics of those memories. They're very hazy, except I do remember that in the theater there was a lot of laughing, and in particular at some of the dialogue. I think there was a lot of laughter in terms of how funny the deadly seriousness of how a lot of the characters, including the Raymond Burr character, delivered their dialogue, at least when compared to how seemingly ludicrous many of the situations were. At least that's the kind of atmosphere that I can seem to recall in a hazy sort of way that happened in that theater when it was played in, 1985. But I admit to my memories are still a bit hazy. But still, it was a remarkable thing to be able to see Godzilla like that, and those huge close-ups that are included in this film of Godzilla's face. Imagine that. Imagine those huge close-ups and how they look on a TV, and imagine those on a big screen. They are just gigantic. So, and also there was I do recall the in the theater, of course, before the film started, the very, very brief short called Bambi Meets Godzilla. So there was that. So anyway, so this is the VHS tape, by the way, that I have of Godzilla 1985. I don't think this has been, I could be wrong, but my understanding is that this has not, this version anyway, the Godzilla 1985 version, I don't think it's been released on disc, but please correct me if I'm mistaken about that. And for sure, I don't know of any official release anyway on disc here in Japan. So, but I do have this VHS tape. So with that, my friends, this is Godzilla, or The Return of Godzilla, or Godzilla 1984, or maybe if you're thinking about this version, Godzilla 1985. But this is the film from 1984 called Gojira, or Godzilla. A great film for those who enjoy the Godzilla franchise. Is it the best Godzilla film? Who's to say? Maybe there are others out there. Sure, I admit that might be fan favorites to a lot of people above this. I totally get that. But still, even if that's the case, there is a charm and there is a fun entertainment value that's associated with this film. And it is very important in the history of the development of Godzilla and the place of it, both past, present, and future. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you once again for your time, as always, my dear friends, and cheers.